Hello, I am Christian Brennan. I'm a dental hygienist in California, and this is my PowerPoint. This PowerPoint I put together basically a long few years back, and I just did it by looking up government websites, looking up the laws. So I am by no means an expert on law, but I think we should all educate ourselves a little bit on what is legal, what is illegal, um, and how do we protect ourselves using the law. My best piece of advice before I even go into any of this is to, number one, document. Always have preferably written documentation. Avoid phone calls with people that you deal with, employees, employers. This goes for everyone. Text communication or email is always better because it's written down, it's recorded. A verbal conversation is hearsay. So you could always say, well, they told me this, and they could say, no, I didn't. But if you have email and text, that's always better. Like if you resign from a job, in general, do a written letter, have copies of everything, and try to avoid going into legal disputes in general. Always know your rights before you go into any job. As soon as you feel violated, address it. Talk to your employers, and deal with people respectfully instead of trying to go to the law and be combative about it. That's really my best piece of advice. Document, document, document. Always have things written down, and then address the issue before it becomes a big issue. And I'm not a lawyer, so this is just things I've looked up on websites, and you can find this stuff on websites. I've tried to reference everything on government websites. There's federal law, and then there's state law. So if you're outside of California, some of this applies and some of this does not apply. So without further ado, let's look at some of these slides. So this is a little bonus I threw into the slide. This is actually 2 pages, and it is an employee contract. I created this trying to think of all the different benefits and expectations you could get from going to a job and accepting an offer. And I realized after I created it, I would probably never ask any dentist to sign this or to look over this because it would probably scare them off. It's a little intimidating to look at all these things. And most offices will not offer most of these options. But these are options I've heard of or benefits at different practices. So I am putting it out there for you to just realize what is available in this career. And if an office is offering you a lot of these perks, maybe you shouldn't ask for as much per hour. And if they're not offering you very many of these perks, maybe you should look for a different office. Just different things to consider. So I'll briefly go through a couple of these. At the very top, we have, are you getting paid per day, per hour, or per patient? So in general, I avoid per patient pay because if there's cancellations, you're going to make much less money. There's no incentive for the office to try to get patients to come in for you because they don't care if you're not getting paid. You'll just sit around. That's illegal in California. You're actually supposed to be paid per hour. But what most dental hygienists get paid in California is actually a day rate. Getting paid per hour, it's stressful. So a lot of dentists, they expect you to see 8 patients per day and work an 8-hour day, seeing 1 patient per hour. The problem with this is you're going to have to come in a little early and stay a little late. Dentists do not want to pay you overtime hours. So your hourly rate is going to be lower if you're working per hour and if you insist on overtime. So it just gets complicated. And then if you work late in the night because you're doing chart notes, the office is not going to be happy about that, even though you're providing quality care. So in general, what I recommend is just accepting a day rate, no matter how many patients you see. If it's 8 or less, I would just be happy with the day rate, and I will do quality care. And in general, we work 9-hour days, 8-hour days, somewhere in there. Yeah, I recommend the daily rate. What else do we have? So scaling route planning, some offices will ask you to do a lot of scaling route planning, but the temp agencies I found out have this thing where if you do too many per day, like if you do more than 2 quadrants in a day, you start getting SRP bonuses. And I always wondered why I never had so many SRPs when I worked through the temp agency. The reason is because offices don't want to pay that additional bonus fee, and so they will only give you so many quadrants of SRP per day. And that's a nice way to basically control how often, so you're not overworking yourself. So some offices give bonuses for SRPs on the first quadrant. Some don't give any bonus. But if you're seeing a lot of SRPs in an office and it's exhausting, you should be paid extra because they're making a lot more money. What else is on here? Paid by production. So usually that's 30% from my understanding. 30% of your production would be your pay instead of a daily rate or an hourly rate. But going back to what's legal, legally, I believe we can only be paid an hourly rate technically. So I have avoided production pay. Dentists, because they can be considered independent contractor, they can have their own patients, they can be paid by production. But in California, we get paid so well hourly that I've never understood working production, how that could come out above the hourly rates that we make. But it doesn't come up very often. But it does occasionally come up. Sometimes you'll hear of bonus incentives where you make so much per hour, but there's also a production bonus if you make over and above. But I'm not an expert on that. It's just an option you should know about. 30% is usually what is the norm. What else is on here? Specifications on compensation. You can read into that. Sick pay in California, we'll go over that. So in California, you get sick pay. And if you don't use it, you lose it, but you can get paid out at the end of the year. If, let's say you have 3 sick days and you don't use them, you keep them for as long as you're employed, and you can add them up over the years, and it maxes out at 6 sick leave days. But if you're never sick, you're never going to use them. So it's nice if the office just pays you those days. If they just give you a flat check, you didn't use your sick pay, here's your money, we're going to pay you for 3 days that you didn't use your sick pay. It's a nice bonus. Most offices just assume you're not going to use them. They assume you're not going to call in sick, and they assume you're not going to ask to collect the money for those sick days. They don't have to pay you for the sick days if you don't use them. But if you call in sick, they do have to pay you, and then their whole day is canceled. So it just makes sense for an office to offer you a payout, but most offices won't. So if you work permanent at an office, you should really use your sick pay, even though you might not be sick. Just call it a mental health day. But if I were an office, I would offer to pay my employees at the end of the year. You know, if you don't use your sick pay, if you're not sick, please don't use it. We'll pay you at the end of the year. We appreciate it. We make more production. Yeah. What else? PTO. We'll cover that when we talk more about sick pay. Time off requests. This part of the contract is just, you know, how some offices, they want time off requests like 6 months in advance. It's just nice to have that clearly stated, you know, how soon do you need the time off requests, etc. 401k. We'll talk, I think, about that later, but in California, currently you can put $6,000 in a 401k each year, and you should have one. If you don't, set that up. It's free. And yeah, you make money that is not taxed, basically. And it's good for a retirement fund. So if you have no other retirement, you should at least have that. On the next slide, I want to get through these. I just go over how often you get raises in the office, at what percent. That's not, we don't usually get raises in this career. The only time I've been offered a raise is when I've been threatening to quit an office because I could make more money somewhere else. And usually they did not match the raise I requested, so I would go work somewhere else and get paid better. So my best advice is really just to know the going rate in your area, not to be tied down to one office. I know it's comfortable to be in one office, but if you can make more money somewhere else, and if where you've put your heart and energy into one office and they're not even going to match it, I would say move on. It's just not worth it. It's business. Yeah. Medical benefits and dental benefits. Usually most offices will give you some type of a dental benefit. I like it when they also give family the dental benefits. Usually a nice dentist, they'll only charge for lab fees. Yeah, it should just be a given that you get dental benefits when you work in an office. Medical benefits, these are less common. I don't know why, because I would definitely take less pay per hour if I got medical, because an office can write off the medical benefits, but you as an individual, when you pay your medical, you do not have any type of a write-off. And in California, we're going to go over tax brackets. About 1/3 of your income, almost, you know, 1/4 to 1/3 is taxed by the government. So if you're making 100K, you know, 20, 30,000 or more is being taken by the government. Even if you're paying medical thousands of dollars per year, that's still taxed income. But if you do it through your office, they can write it off. So that's hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I don't know why offices don't give medical benefits. They just don't want to deal with it. But most don't. It's really nice. It's nice when they do. Some other things on here. Just job expectations. So how much time do I have for a pro fee versus perio maintenance versus scaling route planing? Usually quadrant scaling route planing, I would expect 45 minutes to an hour per quadrant. Some offices give half an hour, which is a little bit ridiculous. But if it's not really scaling route planing, if it's just gingival scaling or just no calculus, just bleeding gums, which happens, sometimes that's diagnosed. You know, I could do that in 30 minutes. But in general, it's nice when the office lets the dental hygienist schedule whatever time is needed. Anything else on here? You can read through the rest of this. But again, this is a contract. I've talked a lot about it. you can look through this. I would never give this to the employee, but it's something that you could look over before going into an interview so you understand maybe what questions to ask dentists before you get hired. Okay, on to the real PowerPoint. Welcome to your first RDH job interview. I've been on a lot of job interviews. Usually interviews go a couple different ways. So my best recommendation for any job interview is to understand what the office is looking for. You can do this by looking up the website and trying to understand what type of clientele they see, what type of procedures they might perform. But the best way is always by a personal reference. If you know one of the dental hygienists in the office, or you know the previous dental hygienist, that is hands down the best way, because you have a personal reference that gets you in the door. And number two, they can also, I don't want to say coach because that sounds very fake, but they can let you know what type of an office it is, what types of patients they see, what are the expectations. I can tell you one brief story. I went in for one job interview at a very nice dental office. And one of the questions that the dentist asked me during the interview was, what do you think about scaling root planing? And so I basically gave him my answer based on my education, but I discovered based on his response after I spoke, what he was really looking for was, well, scaling root planing, it's overdiagnosed, and if a patient is well maintained, they don't need it. So he's a very conservative dentist. So I did not get the job. But that was, if I had spoken to the dental hygienists that worked there previously, and actually sort of knew one of them, they were a friend of a friend, I might have been better aware of the expectations. I might have known what type of an office this was. And conservative doesn't mean perio neglect. It wasn't an office that was not doing enough scaling root planing. They just realized that the offices around them maybe overdiagnosed scaling root planing, which is a pretty common theme in dentistry. So yeah, anyways, let's go on. Biggest topic, independent contractor. So offices will often give you a 1099 or a W-9, which is for independent contractors if you're a temp, usually only if you're a temp. They do this to avoid taxes, because if they give you this tax form, it means you work independent and they don't see you as an employee, and they don't have to pay, it's about 7% of your taxes. So if you do the math on that, well, 7% of $100 is $7. So if we make $500 in a day, I mean, that's getting close to $50. So they're basically weaseling out of $50 if they misclassify you as an independent contractor. A lot of dentists get away with this, but the problem is that independent contractor is a very specific classification of a worker that a dental hygienist in California does not fit into. And the most basic reason is because as a dental hygienist, you cannot open your own practice. You cannot work independently. There's 100 other reasons that I don't even have to go into. But if you're RDH in California, you should not be signing a W-9. You should not be accepting independent contractor as your worker classification. And at the end of the day, you'll lose money if you do. So just starting to get into everything that we're going to cover today. This is a little outline. So independent contractor, we kind of just talked about 1099s and W-9s. The main thing, avoid these. Those are for independent contractors. What you sign in general when you go to a new office is a W-2, and you get W-4 at the end of the tax season. I might be mixing those up, but yeah, just avoid the nines. We'll talk a little bit about exempt and non-exempt, although they confuse me a little bit. SS8 and 989. These are forms if you do get 1099. A lot of different topics. So meals in California, we'll talk about that. Paid sick leave, kind of talked about that a little bit already. Discrimination, that's a big one. Forced clocking out, things like that. Jury duty, are you covered or not? What if my day is canceled? Do I get paid? Tax brackets, we're going to go over that a little bit. Pregnancy leave, I'll talk about that even. Insurance fraud, that's a big one. Workers' comp, CE requirements, which is part of the law and ethics, so why not? Yeah, let's get into this. So a dental hygienist is a non-exempt employee in general. What does that really mean? Exempt means that you are exempt. You do not have to obey the standard laws. You're exempt from the standard laws. To be non-exempt is basically like the average Joe. That means you're paid hourly. You get at least minimum wage. Most people in this world are non-exempt employees. An example of someone who is exempt might be someone who has a salary, someone who just gets maybe $80,000 per year to do a job, and it doesn't matter the hours they work to complete that job. So we as dental hygienists are considered non-exempt. And bolded here, paid at least the federal minimum wage for each hour worked, given overtime pay, yada, yada, yada. You can read that. The only other thing I want to say on here, this is a W-4. This is what you should be filling out. I always recommend that you do 0 dependents. I would say even if you have kids, put 0 on here because tax season will kill you. As a dental hygienist, I have owed up to $10,000 at the end of the year because I did not put 0. I have owed almost that much even when I did put 0 because offices, they don't take out enough money. They should be taking out almost 1/3 of your paycheck. So if you made like $500 in a day, if you made $500 in one day, they should be taking out like $150 of that paycheck. Most offices are not, they're not doing that. They're taking out maybe $100, maybe $90. So you're always going to owe at the end of the year unless you put the 0. Yes. So this slide, this is simply the other side of the coin. So you do not want to accept this W-9. If you do, you'll get 1099 at the end of the tax season, and you'll owe at least 7% more in taxes. But we'll talk about how to avoid that even if you do fill this form out. You're not really an exempt employee. You're not exempt from the minimum wage. You have to have at least minimum wage. You do get overtime, in theory. And usually you're not paid salary as a dental hygienist. I don't think you'll ever work for a private practice that says we want to pay you this much per year, no matter what days you work. That just does not happen in this career. Yeah, let's see what's on the next slide. So if you do get 1099, this is one of the forms you might have to fill out. It's an SS8. And all these forms you can find online. If you just Google it, you can find the image, you can find the PDF, you can go to the IRS website. But if you're going to do any of this, I would recommend talking to a tax expert because they definitely know more than me. I have filled out an SS8 once on one particular dentist because I worked for this dentist for several years, and I just decided I'm sick of being 1099 and I'm not going to take it anymore. So I filled out an SS8 just almost to see how the process would work. And it's hard to see on here, but all these on the bottom here, they're basically like little interview questions the IRS is going to ask you about, describe what type of work you do, describe the setting, and they're really asking if you're independent or if you're under an employer. So all these questions really get at the heart of how a dental hygienist works under the authority of a dentist. You can't work independently of a dentist, etc., etc. So yeah, and one more slide. I think this is, I don't even, to be honest, I don't even remember what this form is. Notice 989. This is another part of filling out the SS8. I think I got this after filling out my SS8. And it was kind of like, well, what do you do now to get your tax money back that you paid into when you were overtaxed as an independent contractor? So just to conclude, number one, if you do get 1099, you can report it up to 3 years. So if you were 1099 2 years ago, you can still report it and you can still get your money back. So that's the main thing. And number two, I would just avoid it. Educate yourself, realize you're not independent contractor. If an office tries to do it, usually all they need is to be told, I'm not going to accept this. I'm going to walk away from the job right now, and you have a full day of patience unless you give me the right forms. So basically, don't back down is my best piece of advice. And if they still refuse, I would probably just report them day number one, and I would probably never go back to that office. In general, I think the last time I was 1099, it was one of 20 offices that I worked. And I just realized that's the office. They're that cheap. And so I'm just not going to go back to the office anymore, is kind of what I resolved. Because there's a lot of paperwork to fill out an SS8 and to follow that up. And what you get back is like $50 per day or whatever. So it's better to just avoid the paperwork, avoid the headache, avoid those offices that are that cheap. And honestly, I think most of the offices, they don't realize it's illegal. They're often told by their accountants, this is cheaper, do it this way. And so, yeah, I think that's my advice. This is just more page 2 and 3 of the 989 form from the IRS, and it's really just commonly asked questions and answers. So if you fill out the SS8 and turn it in, what do I do after that? But my best recommendation is to have a tax expert, have an accountant go in somewhere and have someone who really knows what they're doing fill out that information. This slide, when do I ask about pay? Here are your options. Multiple choice time. Is it during the work interview, verbal interview, after, before? The real answer is always before working. So never be afraid to ask the question before you actually accept a day of work. How will you compensate me? What is the pay rate? Because there are some horrible stories of dental hygienists who, number one, were just never paid for a working interview because they were told, oh, this is like an interview. We don't pay you for this. Or it became a legal battle. So they were paid minimum wage because there was never any discussion over what the pay should be. So whenever you want to know what you're going to make, always ask before working. You can ask during a verbal interview. If you're not comfortable with that and they want to give you a working interview day, or they want to hire you before the first day you work, always ask, what is the pay? Because you might want to walk away from this office. It might be too low. It might be insulting. In some offices, they won't even pay you. So that's surprising, but if you talk to enough dental hygienists, it's actually pretty common. So always ask what your pay will be before working, and any respectable office will have no hesitation and they'll tell you exactly what they pay. This is one of the harshest laws I've ever heard of that is in favor of the dental hygienist or the employee. So essentially, if you are let go from an office, if you're fired, you should expect your paycheck the last day you work. If you are not getting that paycheck on the very last day you're terminated, you have the right to collect pay on every day they do not pay you, like a full day's paycheck. So, for example, if you make $500 per day and they fire you on January 1st, and they don't give you your last paycheck on January 1st, the last day you worked, the day that you're let go, every day after, they owe you a full day's pay. On the second, there's no check. They owe you another $500. On the third, there's no check. They owe you another $500. On the fourth, etc. So this is a brutal law, and it maxes out after 30 calendar days. I've never collected on this, but I do know stories of dental hygienists that have. And if an office refuses to give you that last paycheck on the last day that you work, or if they put it off a couple weeks or a month, they could owe you thousands upon thousands of dollars. Um, and yeah, it's crazy. So usually this applies to offices that are um, just disorganized, honestly, disrespectful. Um, and if you ever did want to try to collect on this law, my best recommendation is documentation. Have emails, speak to people that have gone through this. I can find you people who have gone through this. Um, but it's just blatant disrespect for employees after they're let go. And the law itself it's down here. I think I talked about this a little bit during the contract, so I'm not going to talk about it very much. But there's basically a handful of different ways you should expect to be paid as a dental hygienist. Legally, we're supposed to be paid hourly. You clock in, you clock out, you make overtime. We'll talk about that later. And that's it. The temp agencies I've worked for generally just give you a day rate. They say you have to see this many patients per day, and this is what you expect. Maybe 8 patients per day, 8-hour day, and this is how much you'll make in that day. And it doesn't matter if patients don't show up or if you leave early, you get a flat day rate. So that's the most common pay. There's also production pay. I'm less familiar with this. Technically, it's not legal unless you're an independent contractor, as I understand it. I would say 30% is what I normally hear. And there's also where you could get a mix. So you could get a base hourly rate and a bonus system. So I know dental hygienists that make less per hour or less per day, but they also get bonuses on production, on fluoride and scaling root planing. So there's some days where they actually make a lot more than a day rate dental hygienist. The only other thing I want to talk about regarding pay is how to self-audit. Very often, depending on where you work, offices will forget to pay you. They forget to send you your paycheck. They don't pay you correctly. I had one office where I temped one day and they were asking, "Oh, are you looking for work? We're looking for a permanent." And I was like, "Okay, well, I'm happy just temping." And at the end of the day, I got my paycheck and it looked a little low compared to what I make at other offices. So either they took out more for my taxes or they didn't pay me the full amount. And they were a very suspicious office. So I contacted the agency because I did not get a pay stub from this office. They just gave me a check. They did not break down how they paid me. So I requested that they send me the pay stub. And what I realized after I saw the pay stub was they did not pay me fully. They tried to cheat me out of the pay in the morning because the first patient did not show up, even though I was there a lot earlier than I should have been there. And I stayed a lot later than I should have stayed there because I wanted to leave the office nice. I wanted to clean up everything and take care of my trash and all that. But at the end of the day, they tried to cheat me. So understand your time cards, self-audit, make sure you're getting paid. And on the next slide here, this is just a quick way to check on your pay. So this is your typical paycheck. You should have a certain pay period. And you should be able to count up your days maybe between May 28th and June 12th. I worked, I don't know how many days. Over here, we have the rate. So this person's making $28 per hour, and they worked 80 hours in that time period. So you can do a quick math check and see if they're actually paying you correctly. And you should do this, especially if you're working somewhere permanently. If you don't, I guarantee you there's some offices with bad reputations where their accounting is just not on top of it. And I've actually left offices simply because I can't check my paycheck every single time, and I don't trust certain offices, so I would leave because it's disrespectful, and I would rather work somewhere that pays me accurately on time because it really speaks highly to the level of respect they have when they're paying me, and I don't have to check up on them like they're a child. That's that's basically what it comes down to. This law is very straightforward. This is the website, but this is over the overtime law. So in California, we do get paid overtime after 8 hours in a work day. The federal law specifies 40 hours in any work week. But in California, we recognize that, but we also recognize more than 8 hours in a work day as overtime. And overtime is very straightforward. It basically just means that after 8 hours or after 40 hours in a week, you will be compensated time and a half. So if you make $50 an hour, then you'll be making $75 an hour after working 8 hours or after working 40 hours in a week. Yeah, pretty straightforward. As I talked before, I usually just accept the day rate, smile, and accept that. But technically, we should all be making overtime after 8 hours if you want to actually go by what the law says. So the alternate work week this is a crazy topic. So an alternate work week is basically when an employee who is full-time, is working 40 hours per week. And instead of working, let's say, 5 days a week, where they're doing 8 hours per day, so that would be 5 days of 8 hours, that would be 40 hours in a work week. Instead of doing that, the employee says, I would much rather work 4 days and a couple extra hours. So I would rather work 4 days and work 10 hours. An employee can say they would rather do this, and the employer can say, I accept that. And if you do that, if you're working 10-hour days and you're working 4 days and you want that, you do not get overtime, basically. So this is what the alternative work week is. It's for employees who want to work less days, who accept a longer work day, but also reject overtime. It's made for the employees. What offices often misinterpret this as, it's a way to cheat overtime hours. So a lot of times the employer will force their employees into the alternative work week. They'll say, well, we could be open 5 days a week, but this office, we're only open for 4 days a week. But we want you to work, a 9-hour day, and we don't want to pay you for overtime. So they'll do different things like this where they'll try to get their employees to say, oh, okay. And they'll try to cheat their way out of the overtime. But the things you have to remember about the alternate work week is that number one, it's for the employees. So it's a law designed for employees who want to work less days. It's an option. If you don't want to do it, the employer has to make accommodations. So let's just look through a couple of these points. And these are the websites where you can find all this information. But basically, if you don't want to do an alternate work week, if you want to get overtime, you are entitled to it, number one. If you don't work full time, if you're not working 40 hours a week, this doesn't even apply to you, so it's not even an option for you. But to even adopt this at a work setting, an employer has to do a few things. They have to have a secret ballot, and at least 2/3 of the affected employees have to vote on this. What does that mean? So the affected employees means people who are working 40 hours a week. So this does not apply to part-time workers. They're not included. To my understanding, this does not include the owners. So the doctor who owns the practice does not get to vote on this because they're not affected by the pay rates of an alternative work week. So it only affects a small portion of people, and even then, 2/3 have to vote in favor of the alternative work week. So even if your office is open 10 hours a day, this type of pay structure will only affect the people who are full-time, working 40 hours a week. And even then, where is it? Down here. An employer shall make a reasonable effort to find a work schedule not to exceed 8 hours in order to accommodate affected employees. So even if this passes, even if most of the full-time employees want this, if you say, I'm full-time, I don't want to do this, your boss basically has to accommodate you so that you do make full wages and you do take time and a half after you go into overtime after 8 hours. So in conclusion, all I want to say about the alternate work week is that a lot of offices use this to abuse their employees, and they'll say after 8 hours, I don't have to pay you overtime because we're an alternate work week office and we don't pay overtime to our employees. But if you actually look at the laws, this only applies to full-time workers, number one. Number two, if you don't want to accept this, they have to make accommodations. They have to basically give you an 8-hour day. And at that point, they have to pay you overtime and time and a half. So it's very insulting that a lot of offices have manipulated this law, but you don't have to accept it. Basically, know the law, understand it, and be smarter than the people trying to manipulate the law in their favor. So here we have 2 state laws. I was surprised to find out there is no federal law for a meal time. So under the federal law, you don't get a meal. You don't get any kind of break. Under state laws, you might. So in California, we're pretty good. You get at least 30 minutes in California if you are doing a work period of more than 5 hours per day. So if you work a 5-hour day, you don't get a meal. And it's got to be no less than 30 minutes. Except if you work 6 hours. So what does that mean? So if you work a 6-hour day, you don't get a meal. If you work more than, this is saying if you work more than 5, that's confusing. So if you work a 6-hour day, you might not get a meal break. Legally, you're not entitled to it. If you work 6 hours and 1 minute, you are entitled to a meal break. Most offices give you a meal break after the 3rd or 4th hour. I honestly, I don't recall if you work more than 6 hours, like if you work an 8-hour day, how soon do you need that meal break legally? Can you have it after 7 hours of work? I don't think so. I think it has to be after the 5th hour of work. Yeah, it doesn't exactly specify here, but I believe that is the law. So if you work an 8-hour day, after 5 hours, you need a meal break. And usually you get it after the fourth hour. After seeing 5 patients, I need a meal break anyways. But if you're only going to see 6 patients in 6 hours, maybe you just want to push through. What else does the law say about breaks? You're entitled to 2 10-minute breaks. These don't really exist in our world, but you're supposed to get them, and that's all I can say about it. If you do not get a 10-minute break, that entitles you to an extra hour of pay, basically. So if you can prove to a judge that you were never given any breaks by documenting the hours you worked and the expectations of that office, and probably also that you are documenting conversations you had with the office. Hey, I'm not getting any breaks. Could you please schedule that in? And they ignore your requests. If it goes that far over a long period of time, you could probably get financially compensated for that if you took it all the way to court. But in general, the required 2 10-minute breaks, most hygienists just ignore this law and take the abuse. Or if you work in a good office, you might actually get little breaks here and here, and it's just kind of assumed that you had your 10-minute breaks. So paid sick leave is confusing, and I always get confused on this one, so I'm not going to pretend that I'm the expert, but I'll say a couple things about this. There should be some type of posting. Usually it's a paid sick leave poster. I think the CDHA gives a free calendar to dentists. And usually if you look in the break room, there's going to be something posted about sick leave. And legally, they have to post your legal rights in the office somewhere that's visible to all employees. So most offices, at the very least, have some area, even if you've never been told, where you can find all this information. But most people don't know that. You can go to websites like the ones I posted and look all this information up. But basically, this is what it comes down to, and I'm not going to read through all of this, but some highlights for every hour you work, for every 30 hours you work, you basically get 1 hour of sick leave in that office. So if you work 30 hours per week in a certain office, you're going to get 1 hour of sick leave for that week. So after about 8 weeks, you'll have 8 hours of sick leave. So that might be about a day. You can't use it right away. You can accrue it. You can start building your sick leave days up, but you can't really use it right away until the 90th day of employment. They don't have to pay out your sick days, but they will cap after basically 6 days, or 6 times 8. It does cap, but they don't have to give you those days. You have to use them. Some offices will give you the option to cash out. Some offices, instead of sick days, they give you PTO days, which I think is better, because then you can use days and get paid without claiming that you're sick and just not coming in. You can schedule a vacation. So that's the better deal, is you get PTO instead of sick days. So that's all I'm going to say about sick days, because I'm not the expert. It gets a little confusing. But if you want to know more, This is where you look up the law. Definitely talk to different dental hygienists, and I'll be more than happy to answer more questions if you do want to use a sick paid leave. But those are the basics. On the next slide, I'm going to talk about briefly. I'm just going to zoom through this. This is the contract we already talked about earlier. I actually forgot I put it in here. And then I'm going to talk about this slide real briefly, records. This is basically just what I've emphasized over and over. Document, document, document. Keep records, keep accurate records of the days you worked, the hours you worked, and the payments you received, so you can do an audit on the office and make sure you're getting paid. Any significant correspondence should always be written. This can include email or text. The last thing you want is verbal, because it is hearsay at that point. And then we're going to talk next about types of discrimination. If you think you've been discriminated against, keep a record of it. But this website is a really good website. It talks about very, very specific types of discrimination that are legally enforced. So let's talk about that next. So discrimination. This website is the government's website, which goes over types of discrimination that the law recognizes. And that's all there is to it. So if you feel like you've been discriminated against for any of these 12 reasons, you might have a legal case for it. Just to briefly talk about, I have definitely borderline felt age discriminated against. I can tell you I've been asked by 2 dentists during interviews at different occasions how old I was. They should never ask that question, because it is a form of discrimination. They don't have the right to ask you that. These were both very nice dentists, and I would not pursue the discrimination claim. One office hired me and the other did not. I think they're trying to ask an innocent question, but the question should never be asked, because it could be interpreted as discrimination. Other things, pregnancy discrimination is a huge thing in dentistry, because it is a very female-dominated career, dental hygiene. And women have the tendency to get pregnant because men can't. So pregnancy discrimination comes up a lot in dentistry. I've heard of different women returning to work and being let go. It's just a sticky situation. It comes up a lot. So I'm not going to go into detail about pregnancy discrimination, but we'll talk about pregnancy leave and pay and that a little bit later. Race obviously is going to come up. Gender discrimination, I got to be honest, as a male dental hygienist in dental hygiene, I don't think I've encountered it very much. I could think of a couple of times where maybe the dentist has preferred females in the office, but in general, because dental hygienists don't work closely with the dentists, I think dentists generally mostly care about the quality of care that the dental hygienist is providing, and they want a happy work environment. And so I think most men, at least in the area I work, actually don't face gender discrimination. but it definitely comes up occasionally. And any of these others, harassment, sexual harassment definitely comes up in the workplace. I don't think I've encountered that. I'm trying to think, but I've definitely heard stories. Yes, I've definitely heard stories. So contact me later if you want some entertaining stories on harassment in the workplace. Equal pay compensation, that's an interesting one. Yeah, I'm not even going to talk about these other ones. But these are basically the types of discrimination that are listed on this website. If you feel you've been discriminated for any of these reasons, it's probably worth going to the website and talking to different professionals in law to see if you might be discriminated against and you might have a legal claim. So these next two slides are a very, very hot topic. They're very important to understand. This is the government website where you can reference these. I want to spend more time on the next slide, but there's two types of employment that you might be facing as an employee. There's something called on-duty waiting or paid to wait. And this is what a dental hygienist is. If you come in and you're expecting to see 8 patients in 8 hours, and then they tell you, oh, by the way, your first patient canceled. You should still be paid for the hour that you're there because you showed up to work, you expected to be paid. They might throw a different patient in your chair. Even if you're sitting there reading a magazine, you are there, you're on the clock. Unless they want to fire you because you're not working, you expect to be paid for that hour. Examples on the actual website, which do not include dental hygiene, but examples of paid to wait include a firefighter who might be playing checkers while they're waiting for the alarm to go off. They're probably doing something more productive. But if they're playing checkers, they're still paid. A receptionist who's reading a book while they're waiting for the telephone to ring or call, they're still paid. A doorman who's waiting for someone to come in the door, they're not paid how many people come in the door. They're not paid how many hours they're opening the door. They're paid for standing there waiting. So this is what paid to wait means. So a dental hygienist is paid to wait if they do not have a patient. The flip side is someone who is called off-duty waiting. These are hours that are not paid. So to fit into this category, there's certain requirements that you have to meet. So let's look at these 4 requirements and see if a dental hygienist might fit into this. So your employee is completely relieved from duty. So that means that you show up to the job and there's no patient. No one talks to you about work. There's no meeting. You're not asked to do anything. You're not discussing patients. You're not discussing care. You're doing nothing work-related whatsoever. So this first requirement, maybe a dental hygienist might fall into that. So we could say that maybe you fit the first requirement for hours not paid. But you have to fulfill all these requirements to be not paid if a patient does not show up. So let's see, maybe these other ones, let's see if you qualify. So the periods are long enough to enable your employee to use the time effectively for his or her own purposes. So if your first patient does not show up, that's 1 hour. Could you utilize 1 hour to maybe go home, do some shopping, fill up your gas tank. Could you use that time for your own purposes? 1 hour is not very much time. Maybe you could, maybe you couldn't. 2 hours, if two people didn't show up, that's more likely, but 1 hour, that's kind of iffy. So that's borderline. Maybe you fit that requirement, maybe not. This one is the real clincher. Your employee is definitely told in advance that he or she may leave the job. So told in advance. To me, that would mean the day before. So the day before you show up to work, you're told, hey, the first patient's not going to come in tomorrow. Could you start at 9 o'clock? So this is one example of when a dental hygienist is maybe not going to get their full day's pay. If you show up at 9 o'clock instead of 8 o'clock, they might try to dock your pay an hour. And if you say, okay, no problem, they could probably say those were hours not paid. You're off duty. So this is the one time that maybe you're not going to get a full day's pay. However, if in the middle of your workday, you're told, hey, your next patient's not showing up, could you clock out? No, I cannot clock out. I'm sorry. I was not told in advance. I'm here expecting a full day's pay. So you're not going to put me down as off-duty waiting because you didn't tell me in advance. And what's the last criteria here? Your employee is advised of the time he or she is required to return to work. So basically, this one example might be they're trying to give you a long lunch because one of your patients after lunch is not going to show up. So they say, hey, take a 2-hour lunch. We don't want you back here for 2 hours. So that would be an example of when you're told to return to work. So if you said, okay, I'm not going to return to work for 2 hours, they'll dock your pay. And those are hours not paid. You're off duty waiting. Yeah. So long story short, if you don't want to make 8 hours per day, they have to fulfill these requirements. And the biggest clincher is that you're told in advance that this patient's not going to show up. So we don't want to pay you. And if you agree to it, you basically are going to make less money. My advice, regardless of if you're on duty or off duty, if these requirements are fulfilled and they try to dock you an hour's pay, whatever the case may be, any office that tries to weasel you out of money, I would probably not want to work there, number one. Number two, you really have to agree to all of this. If they're not going to pay you, you have to say, okay, that's fine, I'll still show up to work. So consent is basically what's going to pinch you. That's going to be what's going to make your paycheck less at the end of the day. So some offices will try to put you down as off-duty waiting, but if they do, make sure they fulfill all these requirements, number one. Number two, any office that starts to do this to me and does not give me full day's pay per diem, per day, I'm probably going to leave the office because they don't respect my time. They're not trying to fill the patients, etc., etc. So I hope I made this clear. But if you want to look at the law, these are the specific requirements of being paid, or rather not being paid, if a patient doesn't show up, or if they ask you to leave early or come in late, or if there's a hole in the middle of your schedule. Do you have time to use that time effectively to do something else and clock out? Are you told in advance? So these are really important laws to understand so you're not abused by an office that doesn't want to pay you for a day's pay. And this is also the reason I usually prefer just a flat day rate at offices, so they don't try to start cutting my pay for no-show patients. Does an office pay you if you're called off the jury duty? This is a very simple answer. No. If you are on jury duty, an office does not have to pay you anything. This is one reason I never want to be on jury duty, is because the jury duty is not going to pay me very much at all. I think they pay your lunch. And the office, they're not going to pay you for your time on jury duty. And it's very annoying. That's pretty much all I have to say about it. I will say one other thing. I know a dentist who was very well off. She lived in a very lavish home, and she always got out of jury duty because she would simply write a letter to jury duty saying, oh, woe is me. I'm the sole income for my family. And if I did not go to work, all my employees would suffer, and my children would not be able to go to school, and I would not be able to pay off my house. And she did very well. She drove a Mercedes, but she always got out of jury duty because she wrote a very nice letter to the summons office whenever she got summoned. So sometimes it just comes down to how well you write. So that's my encouragement. If you want to get out of jury duty, learn to write well, and your employees will pay you absolutely nothing for jury duty in general because they don't have to, according to the law. So this is a very important law that not many people are aware of, and you should know it. This is the website again, but basically this is where an office will cancel your day and do they owe you any money? So the most important part of the law is that you actually do show up. You're physically there. So let's say Monday morning, your schedule falls apart and you're driving to work and they're calling your cell phone while you're driving. If you pick up that phone and they say, don't come into work, they don't owe you anything. If you're driving, you shouldn't pick up your cell phone, number one. Number two, if you show up to work, you did report. And at this point, this is where the law takes effect. So you showed up to work, they say, go home. How much do they owe you? They actually owe you a half day's pay. So if you're scheduled for an 8-hour day, they owe you for at least 4 hours of pay. So if you were scheduled for 8 hours and they owed you $500 for the day, even if you go home at that point, you showed up to work, they owe you at least $250. Let's say that you are gonna only see 3 patients that day for 3 hours. They still owe you for half the day, but part of this law says in no event less than 2 hours. So you would think for, what did we say, 3 patients, 3 hours, they would owe you for 1.5 hours at this point if they say go home, because that would be half your day. It actually says in no event less than 2 hours. So if you're down for a 3-hour workday, they still owe you, they owe you for 2 hours of pay, even if you go home right at that moment. So this is a really important law to know, to understand. If an office is trying to call you the morning of, the night before, should I pick up my phone? I will leave that up to you, but an office that cancels your day right before and tells you not to come in, it's a little disrespectful. And most offices, the schedules don't fall apart that much. In an 8-hour day, most offices can still scramble and put together half of a day. and then still pay you for half of a day. But this is a really important law. It's really good to know it because it does stop the abuse of offices that will cancel their employees the day of. Most important part, again, is that you actually show up. You actually report, so you're physically there. So this is a brief slide. Again, this is it's outdated. I made this years ago. The temp agencies nowadays, I think last I checked, they're paying about $480 per day. And my office, they were seeing 6 to 7 patients because we're in COVID right now. Some offices, I'm sure they're still seeing 8, 9, 10 patients a day. What I can tell you about this slide is just understand the going rate in your area. And part of that is really knowing what the temp agencies are paying. Because if you're working somewhere permanent and you're making less than the temp agency rate, you should probably quit. You should probably go work for the temp agency. The demand has always been very high in the Bay Area. You'll never want for work. You'll always have work. So I would not accept a low rate. This is a pretty common range for pay, but honestly, the pay's gone up. So even for new graduates, I tell them I would ask for $60 an hour or higher, which is $480 and up. When I was a graduate, it was closer to $50 an hour. In Southern California, I think it's still about $50 an hour. Yep, that's pretty much all I got to say about this slide. Know what the temp agency rate is, know how much you're worth, and go get it. If you're making less than that, look for better. So I don't know very much about finances, but my oldest brother, he's in finance, so I kind of depend on him for advice. Roth IRAs are very good retirement funds. If you don't have one, go get one. The new standard, I believe, is you can put that was awesome. I'm going to leave that in. That was my Facebook. What was I talking about? So Roth IRA, good retirement fund. Currently, I think you can actually put in $6,000 per year, and it's not taxed. So any income you make off that in the investment of the Roth, it's not taxed, and taxes will go over shortly. Taxes in California are crazy high. Talking about medical coverage, you're probably paying your own medical, and that is taxed. So if you're paying, I don't even know, let's say this is low, but let's say you're paying $3,000 per year in your medical. The money you pay is, this is from your income, right? This is from the money you made. It is taxed income. So even before you put that $3,000 in, originally it was probably $4,000. And then the government said, hey, we want our cut. We want to take away $1,000 of your income. And so you actually lost $1,000 before paying the $3,000 for your medical. And that's a lot of money. So medical premiums are taxed. So it's always a good option if you can to get your employer to give you medical, even if you make less money, because they can write it off. They're not taxed. I think it's ridiculous that in this country, number one, we don't get medical from the government, which whatever, you know, I'm fine to pay for my own medical. But number two, you're going to tax my medical. That's a whole topic I'm angry about. But maybe that's one reason the medical in this country is pretty frustrating, is because it's so expensive. It's good medical, but it's so expensive, and then we're taxed on it. Is just a crazy idea. There is this other thing called the health savings account that I would recommend anyone to look into. If you put money into a health savings account, you can collect interest on the health savings account. You know, you can make money over time, and that money you make is not taxed. So a health savings account is really good, but you can't always use that for like paying off medical bills, medical premiums. It's strict on what you can use a health savings account for, but you can also, I believe, take out from the health savings account when you get older and you're not penalized. So it's something worth looking into. But I'm not a financial expert, but I wanted to touch on finance just briefly during this little PowerPoint. So these are the old tax brackets. I was curious how much taxes a dental hygienist has to pay. So I did the math. So over here we have the federal tax bracket. Over here we have California tax brackets. So this is how much you pay for federal, and this is how much you pay for California. But to do this, you need an amount of income to estimate. So just for kicks, I said, what if you're single and you make $100,000 in California during this year tax brackets? So if you do the math, the federal tax is taking about 21% of the $100,000. So that would be $21,000 roughly. California takes about 7%, and that comes out to close to $7,000. Why is that not exactly $7,000? Well, it's because the first 7,800 or 7,800 is taxed at a lower percentage, 2%. After that, you're taxed higher and higher. So the part of the $100,000, the upper part, after $51,000, the remaining $49,000 is taxed at the highest rate of 9%. But initially, you're taxed at a lower percentage. So it takes a little bit of math to figure all this out. But in the end, I did the math for a dental hygienist making about $100,000, which would be $50 an hour, 5 days a week, 8-hour days consistently. And what it comes out to is about $27,000, almost 1/3 of your income, honestly. And even after all of that, what you have to consider is sales tax. Almost everything you spend the remaining amount of your money on, the remaining, what is that, $72,000 or something. Everything else, you're still taxed almost 10% of that. So if you spend all $72,000, the government's going to take another $7,200 away from you. And then even after that, let's say every office you worked gave you 1099, which is technically illegal. You're actually going to pay more in taxes because you're paying for the employees tax, the employer's tax, excuse me, of 7%, which is almost another 10% when you think about it. So dear God, we pay a lot in taxes. So I would estimate that when you're doing your taxes, when you're doing your paychecks, when you ask them to take out money, it's almost a third. It's at least 1/4. So if you're working and you're making 100,000, in truth, you're going to be making less than 75K, right? Because that would be the government takes 1/4. In reality, you're making closer to $66,000 after all the taxes, because that would be 1/3 of your money is going back into taxes. So that's the sad reality of taxes. When I say try to make $500 a day, they should be taking out well over $100. 100 would be 20%. Taxes take out more than that. So I would say try to make sure they're taking out $150 or so. If they're not, you should be asking them to take out more money. I have been penalized with interest rates by the government because my offices did not take out enough money. It sucks. It hurts. I've owed upwards of $10,000 to the government. Yeah, it's very stressful. Welcome to adulthood. Oh my God, we're only like halfway done. This is my halftime report. At the end of the day, a lot of good offices do things illegally, unknowingly, and a lot of bad offices do a lot of illegal stuff, and you should just leave. So my best advice is to find an office where you respect the people you work with, you love working with them, and even though maybe they're unaware that they're doing certain things illegally, you can politely educate them and work with them and try to come up with solutions where you're both happy. For example, working for a day rate, saying, I just want to make $500 a day, and if you respect my time and just give me the day rate, please, I'm not going to ask you or bug you for the overtime. Most offices that are very respectful will understand that and work with that, and they'll pay it because they have to. The alternative is that they go through a temp agency that's going to actually charge them more money. So find a good office. That's the halftime report. This is a small list of things I wrote down, and this is so common. So many of these things are just illegal or simply unethical, and I see unethical, illegal things daily in my offices, and you just this world we work in, you just have to push on. But these are almost comedic, so different things that I'm not going to talk about these. But if you want to be entertained, if you're a new graduate and you're like thinking rainbows and sunshine, welcome to reality. There's a lot of unethical things that happen in the world of dentistry, and even illegal things that you didn't know were illegal, like improper needle capping. There's actually laws specifically written on how to properly needle cap, which we learned about, but if you do it incorrectly, you're breaking the law, essentially. So a lot of these different things. Anyways, moving on. So even looking at this, this is kind of outdated. So blood pressure, I made this PowerPoint a while ago. So stage 2 is actually currently 140/90. When we talk about the American Heart Association, they rewrote the guidelines. So this slide is actually a little outdated. However, the recommendations for when we do a consultation, if I gotta look this up, but I think it's still the same relating to the blood pressure. So stage 2 is actually 140/90 and above. But we still perform routine dental care, even if they're stage 2, but we do a consultation. At 160/100, this is when we refer and we don't do routine dental care. And then emergencies, if you look at American Heart Association guidelines, I think it's slightly different. I want to say it's 115 diastolic, but I can't remember. At any rate, if you're anywhere near this number, you should consider an emergency care immediately. There's a lot of stories about patients with blood pressure this high. I think what you have to be worried about is if the dentist says, oh, don't worry about it, it's just a cleaning. Generally, what I do when I'm taking blood pressure and it's above this area here, when it's above the refer to a physician before routine care. If the dentist says, you know what, continue with care, don't worry about it. If I'm uncomfortable, if there's a lot of medical issues, I'm going to say, you know what, I'm not comfortable with that. I would rather not. Most dentists will say, okay, and they'll back down. If the dentist still says, you know, do it anyways, and I'm okay with proceeding, I document it, always document it. Say, you know what, the dentist recommended continuing with care, even though the recommended current literature says do not continue with care. Just document it, because then it's on the physician. It's on, not the physician, it's on the dentist. Protect your license, basically. Document, document, document. Most offices actually do not take blood pressure, which is sad because I have seen high blood pressure on a lot of patients in the offices that do take blood pressure. What else can I say? Down here, regarding heart attacks at the bottom here, the current literature on ASA recommendations says that if you have a heart attack within 6 months, I'm sorry, the previous literature said 6 months. The current ASA recommendation says 3 months. If you had a heart attack less than 3 months ago, you should probably not do routine care. The older literature says 6 months, but there's not a lot of guidelines on that. So I generally go by the ASA recommendation of 3 months for all these different things: stents, CVA, TIAs, and yeah. So I hope that's all clear, and I'm moving on. So this slide is in regard to cold sores. So if your patient shows up and they have herpetic lesions, there's a lot of dentists who say, not a big deal, just continue with care. But the CDC actually does have very specific guidelines regarding herpetic lesions, which basically say, you know, you should not be treating these patients. There's only 2 types of treatments you should render: emergency treatment and treatment of the lesion. So if you're going to laser the treatment, that's one option. But you shouldn't be doing just prophies on these patients. And any dentist who thinks they should also look up these different articles on examples of when herpes has been transferred patient to patient to patient because these protocols were ignored. Lots of aerosols from ultrasonic scaling as well as ultrasonic bath have contaminated not only the patient, but also clinicians. Hygienists have gotten ophthalmic herpes keratitis, which could actually lead to blindness in the dental hygienist, which is a very scary thought, all because the office wanted to improve production and ignore the protocols of telling patients with cold sores, stay home, don't come in here, we don't want to see you. So there are articles that will protect you, educate different offices on why we should not see patients with cold sores. When you do your EI exams, your oral cancer screening exams, sometimes I like to call these the cold sore exams because cold sores are very common and you do not want to see these patients. You want to send them home. If there's any iffiness, if there's any leaky lesions, if there's any type of cold sore, get out, go away, go home. We don't want to see you. I'm sorry that the office is not going to make money off your prophy today, but I want to be safe and I want to protect my patients, and I'm not going to see that patient. And the office is still going to pay me my full day's pay because of all the topics we previously discussed. And that's how it's going to be. If they want to fire me, I'll happily go home that day and work somewhere better at some better office the next day. But do not let an office intimidate you into seeing patients with cold sores because it's unprofessional, it's unethical, it's dangerous. You're going to possibly go blind. So just do not do it. End of story. And any dentist that pushes you into doing it is nuts. They're stupid, and I'm just straight out gonna say that right now. So this is one of my pet peeves, doing antibiotic prophylaxis before the patient comes in. They should have taken this 30 to 60 minutes before the procedure, if you know anything about the guidelines. But there's this little thing in the guideline that says, if the dosage of antibiotic is inadvertently forgotten, not administered before, then the dosage may be administered up to 2 hours after the procedure. So a lot of dental providers see that guideline and think, oh, well, they didn't take their antibiotic, but we could still do the procedure. We could still collect the insurance. We could still make money off this patient, and they could just take their drug when they get home. But the problem is, if you know anything about antibiotic prophylaxis, is the recommendation is really you take it 1 hour before, so it's in the bloodstream, so it has the best effect, and they're less likely to get endocarditis as a result. So that's, this is all I want to talk about regarding this, but a lot of practitioners believe, so long as they take it when they get home, they're fine. I don't think that's practicing the highest standard of care. I don't feel ethically like I did the best job I could as a dental provider if I'm telling the patient, take it when you get home. Who says they will take it when they get home? That's on the patient, but I would not sleep well at night. So I always recommend follow the highest standard of care, which is make sure the patient take their antibiotic before they came in for care. Some offices, they do have amoxicillin and mycins in the cabinet, so they could take it before they sit down in the chair. But even then, it's not 1 hour to 30 minutes before the procedure. So even that is not the best procedure, number one. Number two, that also implies that you are dispensing a prescription medication to the patient, which is not only unethical, it's also illegal. So only the dentist, someone who has a license to dispense prescription medication, is really allowed to do that. Even if the dentist says, no, you can do it. Legally, you do not have a license where you are allowed to dispense that medication to the patient. So it's really a sticky situation. I recommend follow the guideline to the highest standard, and that's basically all I want to say about pre-med. And then you can do whatever you want. These next two slides are very simple. This is more advice than anything. If you're in an unethical office, number one, just get out, just leave, just don't stay there. You're not going to change them. Number two, never make any accusations in front of a patient. Be professional. That's just common sense. Number three, in California, dentists do the treatment planning, and RDH can refer, but you can't treatment plan as a dental hygienist. So if the dentist says do scaling root planing, and you do it, even if you don't necessarily believe in it, and if you don't support the dentist on their treatment plans, get out, find somewhere better. A lot of dentists, they really trust their dental hygienist to do the treatment plan recommendations. Legally speaking, it's up to the dentist, but a smart dentist, I think, will hire a dental hygienist who is proficient in treatment planning, and it's more of a cooperation between the two. So find an office where they utilize your talents. And then when I say refer, legally speaking, referring someone to another office, that's not like a prescription. So I would make recommendations to patients, and this gets a little sticky, but I would often tell a patient, according to the guidelines, according to the American Periodontal Association, is that what they're called? APA. It's recommended that after 7 millimeters a pocket, you should see a professional. So I would use very careful language like that when I would make my recommendations to a patient to see a specialist. And you have to be careful with this because a dentist does not always want you referring their patients out to a specialist, even when it's the best recommendation, even when it's what the guidelines suggest. But as a dental hygienist, you really do have an ethical obligation to put the patient first. So if you're working for a dentist that does not want to refer out for extractions, does not want to refer out for endo, does not want to refer out for perio, but you know better, number one, get out, go somewhere better. But number two, you can educate the patient and let the patient know that they have the right to see a specialist. So you can refer without stepping on any toes legally and pushing the patient out of the office, because that's where it gets a little sticky and dentists get a little bit controlling over their patients. And I could definitely see a dentist saying, you don't have the right to refer my patients to another dentist. But it's not like a prescription. Legally speaking, you could get into trouble here, but just be very careful with the language you choose and be careful with the dentist that you choose to work with, because if a patient needs to see a periodontist, an ethical dentist is going to allow you to refer that patient to see a periodontist. Document. Number one, I keep talking about that, do it. And if there's an ethical problem, I have no solution. Get out. I can't remember why I put this number 5, but it's ethical problems are ethical problems because there's no easy solution, right? So talk through it, get out of the office, try to find somewhere that you are on the same wavelength as everyone else in the office, where you and the dentist have the same idea in terms of treatment planning, in terms of putting the patient first. So this slide is just stay connected. This is really for the students when you graduate. Stay connected with your classmates so you're grounded, so you have someone to vent with about your daily experiences. You don't want to vent with your office because that could get toxic. I would say stay connected with your faculty as much as you can. These are now your colleagues. They're not your teachers anymore. These are the people that you might even see in private practice. I know I've worked with students that I've graduated with. I talk to students who work in offices that I've worked at, and now we're colleagues, so try to stay connected. And part of this is also everyone should have mentors. So we should all have people that we look up to, that help us improve, that keep us grounded in our ethical dilemmas. If we feel like we're being abused, we need to talk to our mentors and figure out, what should I do? Should I find a different office? Am I being justified in my feelings? So always have people that are your mentors that you can ask questions about anything. Instrumentation, I'm struggling with this SRP. Do I have the right instruments? Should I ask my office for better instruments? What do I do? And then stay connected with your local component. The American Dental Association, American Dental Hygienists Association, the California, all these different components. I recommend go to the local CEs and stay connected with people in your area. The Labor Board is a good website to know. If you're worried about the law, look up the law. Call them, talk to them. They have lawyers. You can talk to them. And then social media is a great outlet. There's lots of different websites, Facebook pages where you can just connect to different resources to talk through different situations that maybe these other outlets could not answer for you. So if you're trying to collect unemployment benefits, did you quit? Were you fired? Or were you laid off? This will depend on, are you actually going to be able to collect unemployment benefits? And there's all these criteria which the Unemployment Benefits Agency will look into, this government agency, to determine if you are entitled to any unemployment benefits pay, and then how much. What I really want to say about this slide is unemployment benefits in California are pathetic, and you could definitely apply for them, but they don't pay very much. So the maximum benefit per week for anyone in California is under $500 per week, which dental hygienists make well over that per day. So if you're planning on living on unemployment benefits, it's not a great way to live, basically. So I've never really looked into filing unemployment. If you get fired, go get another job, is my recommendation. Because as soon as you get hired somewhere else, the Bureau for the government, the Unemployment Benefit Bureau, or whatever they're called, the EBD, they're going to stop paying you unemployment because now you're working. If you are curious, if you do want to make unemployment, you can look into it. And then the government is going to ask several questions like, were you laid off or were you fired? If you were fired because you were incompetent, you didn't do your job well, or maybe it was due to sexual harassment or something unprofessional. If you're fired for those reasons, you might not make unemployment. You might not be given unemployment benefits. So there are stipulations, even if you're laid off, you might not make the full amount of unemployment. It depends how much you were working there. And then to further iterate, under certain circumstances, your boss that laid you off might be required to pay a percentage of the unemployment benefits. And if they laid you off, they might want to rehire you. But if you start trying to collect unemployment, they might not want you back because they're bitter. But that's not always the case. Sometimes employers are not required to pay that percentage of unemployment. I honestly just don't know the full law. But what I do know is the benefit per week is very low. And so in general, I have not pursued looking at collecting any unemployment benefits in my career. So workers' comp claims, this is another topic that I'm not very familiar with, but I did look up some of the laws, and I think it's important to have a basic understanding of workers' comp and what it is. So if you ever are considering filing a workers' comp claim, you have a basic understanding of what's going on. So what is workers' comp? So every business in California is basically required to have insurance for their employees in case something goes wrong. So if there's an accident and maybe, let's say, for example, the autoclave falls on you and you're injured and now you can't work, you should file a workers' comp claim through your office, which will go to the insurance company that your office is paying for. And you fill out this paperwork, tell them what happened, tell them why you can't work anymore, and they will basically pay for your medical coverage to get better. And that's what workers' comp is. Some things you should know about workers' comp is that, number one, all businesses are legally required to have it in California. Sometimes your employer will not want you to file a workers' comp claim because they'll think their premiums will go up. But it is not up to your boss to tell you that you can't file a claim. It's not their decision. Legally, if you want to file a claim, you can file a claim. And it's up to the insurance company to approve or deny your claim. It has nothing to do with your employer's desires. So if you feel like you're injured on a job, report the claim and leave it up to the insurance company to determine whether you have any type of compensation coming to you. Now, having said that, there is some interesting things I found on the website that you could get physical therapy, you could get visits to a chiropractor, or even occupational therapy visits. And this is just under the law. You could be entitled to these different things. It could come out of disability insurance. It could come out of unemployment insurance, temporary disability benefits. So all these things we basically pay into in our taxes. This is where the money comes from, as well as it could up the premiums on the office. But if you're injured, you should probably consider filing a work comp claim. And the final thing I want to say is it's not just for something fell on me or I slipped and fell at work. It's not just a very specific type of injury. It's also for chronic injury. So if you have carpal tunnel, that's probably from scaling too much. And you could probably file a workers' comp claim for an injury that was chronic. So if you have to have surgery, you could file a workers' comp claim and see if they'll reimburse you for the carpal tunnel surgery. There's one other thing I wanted to mention. That it is illegal for any medical facility or physician to bill you for work-related injury. So I found that really interesting on the website. Basically, what that means is if you fell and you got injured at work, but you're scared, you don't want to report it to your work, and you go to a medical doctor and say, hey, this happened, I broke my arm at work, it's actually illegal for them to bill you. So you actually have a legal obligation to go through your work and to report the injury and to do the proper legal route so that the insurance company through your business pays to have your arm fixed if you broke your arm at work. So that's important because I think a lot of people in our career think, oh, geez, I'm going to go physical therapy. I'm going to go have carpal tunnel surgery. But that's, I should have to pay that. It's actually illegal for you to pay that. So that's something you should know about. File the workers' comp claim. If they pay it, they pay it. If they don't, then you could go pay it on your own, okay? But these are important things that you should know. So just a quick thing on insurance fraud because it comes up in dentistry. The legal requirement for fraud requires two different things. So it requires the actual act, but it also requires the intent. So if you are, for example, trying to do insurance fraud, maybe you're trying to do scaling root planing in December, but the insurance is not going to pay out for the full amount. They're only going to pay for half the amount. And so what the office might do is they might say, we're going to bill out the other insurance in January. So then the insurance will pay it, even though we did the actual procedure in December. So this would be an example of insurance fraud because we did the procedure in December, but we're going to bill half of the procedure in January. So we're going to trick the insurance company and say, no, we did it in January because we want you to pay it. Well, that's actually insurance fraud because one, we're committing an act where we're incorrectly dating the procedure. We're saying we did half in December and half in January when we didn't. And we have the intent to commit a crime because we are trying to collect insurance money in the next year based on when they'll actually pay it according to their guidelines, even though we actually did the procedure in December. So we're actually trying to deceive the insurance company on when we did the procedure so that they actually pay out what we think we're owed. So technically, this is insurance fraud because we're manipulating the dates on when we did the procedures. So insurance fraud requires an act which is illegal, like changing dates on a procedure with the intent to commit a crime, which is usually the intent to get payment on something from an insurance company. And that's what fraud is. If you accidentally screw up your dates and that gives you the money, that's not fraud. You have to have an intent to commit the crime. falsifying dates is probably the most common way. As a dental hygienist, I don't actually deal very much with what the front office is doing in terms of insurance collections. So I'm pretty naive to insurance fraud, but I will tell you it's very common in dentistry to see insurance fraud. So my best recommendation is be thorough and accurate in your notes, be truthful in your records. If the insurance company wants to audit the records, they can do that and they will see what the dental hygienist wrote down. So protect your license, protect yourself. Don't be concerned with what the front office is doing. If you think it's an office that's doing a lot of insurance fraud, I would probably recommend find a different office. I, in general, try to avoid conversations about insurance because I find it will change how I recommend treatment on the patient. And I always like to recommend the highest quality treatment without insurance in mind. So document. Avoid conversations about insurance and just be truthful is my recommendation to avoid insurance fraud. But this is what insurance fraud is if you're curious. It's committing an act with the intent to deceive, basically to collect insurance usually is what insurance fraud involves. So dental insurance and dental codes don't always mesh with reality. We try to teach you the best we can in dental hygiene school, but if you actually look at the codes, they're very black and white sometimes. So for example, dental prophylaxis is defined, if you look up the CDD codes, as coronal plaque calculus stain removal. Well, if you went to dental hygiene school, you're probably scaling down to the JE, the junctional epithelium, on every single patient, because why would you want to leave calculus on the root surface, even if you were doing a dental prophy, even if there was no bone loss? There's still the potential that the crown is going, the calculus rather, is going well below the crown surface, even on a patient that doesn't have any recession, any attachment loss. So we might be doing a prophy on someone who does have more calculus than is on the crown. So that's one example of how dental insurance doesn't always recognize what anatomically is actually there. If you look at these different codes and their definitions, you'll notice there is a new code for gingival scaling, which recognizes some of these heavier patients that maybe they don't have bone loss yet, but they need more than just a prophy. So what do I have to say about this slide? I would say try to stay out of insurance is my best recommendation. Let the front office do the insurance and write your notes accurately. Try to do the appropriate code for what you're doing. But if you're doing a prophy, make sure you're scaling the whole tooth. But it's a really gray area, and it's frustrating as a provider because you want to provide the best care you can, but sometimes the codes don't always mesh with what is accurate. Yeah, that's all I have to say about this slide. Good luck. I threw this slide in here basically because there's always new laws coming about, and this was one of the newer ones, which was pretty interesting. And it basically said like an office that's going to hire you is not allowed to ask what you previously made. And that's kind of a cool law. So if you ever go into a new job interview and they say, you know, what do you expect to make? What was your last office paying you? You are not required to tell them, and they are not legally allowed to call your previous office and ask how much you made. But what's important is that laws are always coming about. There's new laws all the time, and we have to stay up on the most current laws. I guess is the point of this slide. So I thought I'd briefly talk about CE requirements in California for a dental hygienist, because new grads are always confused on this, so I thought I'd just rehash it quickly. You are required to have 25 units of CEs every 2 years. If you're a new graduate and you just got licensed, you cannot collect CE units, and you're not expected to have CE units until after your first renewal. So when you graduate, you get your license. Until your first renewal, you do not collect any CE points. After your first renewal, you are required to get CE credits for over the next 2 years. And as I said before, that's 25 units for a dental hygienist. If you're an RDH AP, you need 35 units. The mandatory courses are, of course, infection control, the California Dental Practice Act, which is law stuff, and basic life support, which can be a maximum of 4 CE credits. Sometimes it's less, sometimes it's 4. If you're born in an even year, I'm born in 1980, that means that during the even years, I'll have to get my license. So currently it's 2020. I just renewed. My license will not be renewable again until 2022. And then odd years for odd years. If you're born in an odd year, you renew in your odd years. What else? Each licensee must renew their license every 2 years, yada, yada, yada. It takes about 4 to 6 weeks to process renewal applications. So do it as soon as you can and go to the website and, keep track of all your documentation, keep track of your CEs. I do it online. I just scan them into my computer and throw them into my email account. But there's software. If you want to keep track, you can put them in different software programs to keep track of your CEs. Okay, we're pretty much done. This is just a summary of what we went over. So stay away from the 9s. Don't do any W-9s or 1099s. They're a headache. You'll lose 7% of your income if you do that. Know the law. Educate yourself. Keep records of your hours, days worked, any conversations. Document. Email or text is preferred over conversations. Always try to do it so you have a written record somewhere. Don't clock out between patients. If they ask you to, just say, sorry, I can't. I need to do sharpening. I need to vacuum. I need to clean the windows. I need to mop the floor. I need to take out the trash. There's a million things you can do between patients. Review charts, help at the front. I could write a list. So, if they want you to clock out, find a better office. Put the patient first. Educate, refer, follow standards. If an office is not putting the patient first, if they want you to see high blood pressure patients, patients with cold sores, find a better office. With your money, make good money, save, give, invest, use your time wisely. If you're not making as much as you would temping, find a better office or temp. Don't put up with an office that's going to try to make you clock in and clock out. They're not going to fill your schedule. Go somewhere where they respect your time. And then rely on your colleagues, find mentors, stay in touch, vent with people who you went to school with, but don't vent within your colleagues because it creates bad mojo. If you're complaining about your dentist who is always late for your exams with another employee, it's going to create a bad vibe in the office. If you have to vent, do it with your friends who are outside the office is my recommendation. And then try to solve these issues within your office as best you can so that you respect one another. Yeah. So these were some of the things that we went over today. So independent contractor, you are not an independent contractor. So do not accept 1099s or W-9s. You're non-exempt. If you do, there are ways you can still get full pay, but it's a headache. So honestly, you just want to know the law so you can push back. And I guarantee you, if the office says we need you to fill out a W-9 and you say, I refuse, I'm going home, they'll be scared that the day is going to fall apart and they'll cave. And if they don't, big deal. You can work somewhere else the next day and you probably don't want to work for that office. Always ask about pay before you agree to working somewhere. What method of pay is legal? The hourly pay is the legal way, but I would be happy with a per day, per diem paycheck. Working 410s, the alternate work week, in general, I would never agree to that. And legally, an office can't force you to work 10-hour days without overtime. Meal times, you're required to get at least a 30-minute meal break. I prefer 1 hour of unpaid meal time. I didn't talk about this, but office hours, you should be getting paid your full rate for office hours for any office meetings. I've heard of offices that ask you to take a lower pay rate for a meeting. And if you agree to that, you are basically saying, okay, that's fine. But you have to agree to that is the main point I want to make about this, this PowerPoint. If they say we are requiring you to come in for a meeting and we're not going to pay you the full wages and you say, I refuse, then basically they either one have to agree to what you want. They have to agree to pay you your full wages for a meeting, or number two, they have to say you're not required to come to this meeting because we're not going to pay you your full wages. Or number three, they're going to say, no, you have to come. If you don't come for minimum wage, you're fired, which does not intimidate me because I can find an office that will pay me for the time I'm worth. So if an office threatens you ever and tries to pay you less than a full wage per hour, don't be intimidated. Just say, thank you, I would rather work somewhere else. That's one of the big takeaways I want everyone to understand after this PowerPoint is even with all the laws, just have a high standard and don't be intimidated by an office. And if you're not sure, talk to somebody else that doesn't work in the office. Talk to me, talk to another dental hygienist, see if what they're asking is fair. For example, if an office said, we want you to go to the CE course and we're not going to pay you an hourly rate to go to it, but we'll pay you to go to the course. We'll pay for the course. We're going to pay for your hotel. We're going to pay for your vacation time. So if it's something like that and I really want to go to Hawaii or go on a cruise, I might say, okay, thank you. So you just have to negotiate, but never feel like you need to put up with abuse or you need to accept lower pay for meetings or CE courses that you don't want to go to. What else did we cover? Contracts. Try to make sure that they're always written down. Verbal contracts will not hold up in court very well. Keep records. Understand what discrimination is according to the law. Forced clocking out is, you cannot be forced to clock out. If they want you to clock out, you have to do it. If someone else is clocking you out, that's illegal. If there's a no patient show and they don't pay you, that's called a forced clock out, and that's illegal. Jury duty. You're not paid. End of story. Sad, I know. Canceled days, we went over that. Not going to go back into it. Know the going rate in your area. Know what the temp agencies are paying. Tax brackets are expensive. Put money aside. What else? Network, very important. We went over pregnancy leave, unemployment benefits, workers' comp, insurance fraud, CE credits. I think all the others we went over in full detail. Yeah, so thanks for hanging in there for the CE course. That's pretty much all I have for now. I think the next slides are some question answers if you want to stick around for that. But I hope you learned a lot from this topic in this PowerPoint show. Thanks. All right, we have a quiz show game, quiz games to see how much I taught you. I haven't seen these in a while, so let's see how well I do. In a dental office setting, which tax form is illegal for a registered dental hygienist to sign? I believe it's the W-9. Yes, W-9. Avoid nines. Next question. When should I ask about pay? Probably before I work, before the working interview, before any scheduled work. The actual verbal interview is not paid typically, but if I come in and produce, if I do any type of work, I should expect pay. Yes, before working. When am I entitled to overtime? And do mandatory meetings count for hours worked? Yes, meetings count, and you should expect full pay. When am I entitled to overtime? So federal law says anyone in the United States gets overtime after 40 hours of work in a week. California is after 8 hours of work in a week, in a work week, in a work day, in a work day. Yes. Am I correct? Yes. After 8 hours of work in any day, you get overtime. And yes, meetings do count. Next question. Can an employee force the staff to work an alternate work week, basically where you're working 4 days, 10 hours a week? No, they cannot. To do the alternate work week, basically the employees vote. So the employer has no say. The employees vote on it, and only the full-time employees vote. And if you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it. Even if it's an alternate work week office, a full-time employee that doesn't want to work an alternate work week has the right to work a 8-hour day with overtime. Yes, the employer must accommodate. The employees vote that are full-time, mind you. Only full-timers get the vote. If you're a part-time employee, you are not applicable, and you still make overtime after 8 hours in a workday, no matter what. If my employer does not give me 2 10-minute breaks, what am I entitled to? Oh, so for every 10-minute break they do not give you, you get an hour's pay, basically. Yeah. Not given, every break not given, the employer must pay 1 hour wages to the employee. So if you work an 8-hour day, you do not take your 2 10-minute breaks. You're basically getting paid for a 10-hour day. I'm not sure if those hours would be included overtime pay, because yeah, that'd be a lot of money. But I've never tried to collect on the 10-minute breaks? I'm sure someone has. Next question: How can you get the most job benefits? I don't know. 401k, CEs, paid time off, annual raises. I guess ask, request a written employee contract. It's not a bad idea. Most offices I worked at, they don't have an employee handbook, or I've never seen it, but they're supposed to. Even if you don't write your own employee contract before you get hired, it's a good idea to just request they write something out for you that clearly lays out the pay. At the very least, they should write down how much you're making per hour. Yeah. Next question: How much paid sick leave do I get, and when can I use it? Well, a full-time employee gets about 3 sick days per year, but it caps at 6 sick paid days, and you keep them every year unless you use them or quit. And when can I use them? I think it's after 90 days of employment. You get 1 hour for every 30 hours worked, and you can use it on the 90th day of employment, which is after like 3 months, I guess, if you're full-time. Next question: If an employer asks me to take a longer lunch because the patient canceled, what can I say? Well, you can say, no, thank you. There's some things I need to do, so I'm going to clock back in, basically. So if an employer is pushing you, you can push back. And they have to pay you. If you're clocked in, they really have to pay you, or they can basically say you're fired, don't come back. So those are the 2 options. The third option is you can say, okay, I'll take a longer lunch, okay, and then you don't get paid, and they're happy because they don't have to pay you. I guess those are the 3 options. But I recommend not taking a longer lunch if you don't want it. Come back early, do some sharpening, organize your room, and don't get gypped. Yep, no thank you. I'd rather work on the clock and receive pay. Number 9, if I am summoned for jury duty, what does my employer owe me? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. It sucks. Number 10, if I show up to work and the employer didn't tell me the day was canceled, they owe me what? They owe you at least a half a day's pay. So if you were scheduled for an 8-hour day, they owe you for 4 hours, even if they send you straight home. Now, if they call you and they catch you before you actually step into the office, they do not owe you. So know the difference. Number 11, if I develop an injury as a result of my occupation, why must I report it to the office? Because it's illegal if you seek medical attention on your own because of a workplace injury. That's true if the autoclave falls on you. That's true if you get carpal tunnel after working there because you did too many SRPs. It is illegal. I got it right. Last question. If I want to be awarded any benefits from the law and avoid punishment, what must I do? Document. Yes. Be timely, be truthful, and document. So the reason I put these in is document, document, document. So written down, everything written down. Be honest, be truthful. If you lie about anything and the law finds out you're trying to deceive them, you're the bad guy now, and you're not going to get any claim that you wanted. Yeah. And be timely. So there are certain laws that you only have a certain amount of time to pursue. For example, if the office gave you a 1099 and you want your money back for all the taxes you paid, you have 3 years to report that office. You can go back 3 years into your taxes and report them, but after 3 years, you can no longer report that office. Yes. Good quiz, good questions, and I think that might be the last slide, so thank you for participating.